When an unsuspecting school bus driver pulled up to what should have been a routine drop-off, what began as an ordinary afternoon soon revealed a dark truth no one saw coming, a secret that would endanger not only an innocent family but everyone trying to protect them. This is a story of betrayal, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're reading from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Frank Miller had been a bus driver for 15 years, long enough to have seen every type of child imaginable board his big yellow bus. He took pride in memorizing their names, their quirks, and their sometimes wild daily chatter. Driving the afternoon shift after school let out, he watched these kids pile in day after day, exhausted from the demands of their classes yet still bursting with youthful energy. Over the years, Frank had grown accustomed to the subtle rhythms of the route, where the roads curved, which corners had trickier turns, and the rough patch of asphalt near the final drop-off of the day. He prided himself on never hitting the brakes too hard, on maintaining a gentle hand on the wheel so the kids felt safe. Lily Thompson was one of the quieter ones. She was 11 years old, with long brown hair often tied back into a neat ponytail. She usually wore bright t-shirts and colorful sneakers, carrying a backpack almost as big as she was. Frank had observed that she often hummed to herself or scribbled in a little notebook, engrossed in her own world. Lily was polite. She always said good afternoon, asked how he was doing, and thanked him before stepping off at her stop. Her mother, Miranda Thompson, sometimes waved from the porch or the window, giving Frank a small smile of gratitude. It was a warm routine, and Frank looked forward to that small end-of-day moment because it reminded him of his own children, grown and living far away now. That particular day started like any other. The final bell rang at precisely 3:30 p.m., and the children spilled out from the school's side doors. Frank greeted each of them, checking them off his mental list, then pulled away, starting the usual route home. He dropped off group after group of chattering kids, gave friendly nods to watchful parents, and endured the usual wave of squeals and laughter drifting from the back rows. By the time he reached Lily's stop, the bus was empty save for the small figure sitting in the third seat from the front on the right side. Lily had her backpack clutched to her chest, her knuckles white from gripping the straps. That alone caught Frank's attention. She normally wore her backpack with the straps over her shoulders, never hugging it so protectively. Frank stopped in front of Lily's driveway right at 3:45 p.m., as he had so many times before. The house looked the same, modest but charming, with a newly mowed lawn. He knew Lily's mother usually waited by the door, or sometimes even stepped out onto the front porch. But on this day, there was no movement at all. The front door was ajar, as though it had been left open in a hurry. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. It struck Frank as odd, but he tried to remain calm. He turned slightly in his seat. "All right, Lily," he said, trying to keep his voice warm and reassuring. "Time to go home." Lily looked at him with wide eyes, her face pale. Her grip on the backpack tightened until Frank thought the seams might tear. She shook her head in small, determined movements. Frank frowned and asked gently, "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" She opened her mouth, but for a moment no words came out. Then she whispered, in a voice trembling with terror, "He's in the house." Frank's heart lurched. He kept his composure. "Who's in the house?" Lily's eyes brimmed with fear as she uttered, "The man in the closet." Frank felt a cold wave slide over him, like stepping into a winter wind without a coat. He glanced back at the house again. It was so silent, so still, except for that slightly open front door. It was as if the door itself stood as a warning. He forced himself to focus on Lily. "Where's your mom?" he asked. "She never picked me up," Lily said, her voice quavering. "She always meets me out front." "Always?" Frank nodded, trying to piece together what could have happened. "All right," he said, "stay here for a second, okay?" He pulled out his cell phone, dialed Miranda Thompson's number. He had it saved because he believed in safety measures and collected a few emergency contacts for each child. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, then a click. For a heartbeat, Frank thought someone had picked up, but the line was silent. A second later, the call ended. No, hello, no background noise, just that abrupt severing of the connection. Frank felt a ripple of dread. He tried again, and the same thing happened. A few rings, then that sudden cutoff. He drew in a breath, hearing the pounding of his own heart, then turned back to Lily. She was trembling, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Frank took a moment to calm himself before speaking quietly. "I'm going to call the police, Lily. We'll get some help." Lily nodded, but didn't relax her hold on the backpack. Only then did Frank notice that its surface was slashed. A long, jagged cut ran diagonally across the fabric, as though someone had tried to slice it open with a sharp object. The edges were frayed and dark, as if scorched by friction. Frank's thoughts churned. Why would someone slash a child's backpack? He leaned closer to Lily. "Sweetheart," he asked gently, "what happened to your bag?" Lily swallowed hard. He was looking for something. A knot formed in Frank's stomach. Who was Honey? She blinked back tears. "The man in the closet." Frank stayed silent for a moment, trying to absorb the weight of those words. Then he forced himself to remain calm, to be her rock in that moment. "Did you see him?" Lily nodded, biting her lower lip. "Yes, last night. I woke up and he was in my room. Then Mom woke up too. She chased him out, but—" Lily shuddered as if reliving that terror. "She said if I ever saw him again, I should run." Frank felt his mouth go dry. He remembered Miranda as a sweet but quietly determined woman. If she had seen an intruder, she would have done everything in her power to protect Lily. But now, with the front door ajar and her phone calls unanswered, Frank feared the worst. "We're going to get help," he repeated, more for himself than for Lily. He dialed 911 and, careful to keep his voice low and steady so as not to further alarm Lily, explained the situation. The dispatcher's tone became urgent when Frank mentioned a possible intruder in the house and that Lily's mother was missing. They promised to send officers immediately, urging Frank to stay put and keep the child safe. Frank tried to reassure Lily, but she only held her backpack closer, as though it were a shield protecting her from the memory of that man. Frank studied the slash again. Something was off. Something about that cut, the aggression behind it, felt deeply personal. This was not a random break-in. Lily's mother was aware of an ongoing threat, enough to warn Lily to never enter the house alone. What had Miranda discovered, or who had she crossed paths with? Then Frank saw it. Movement behind the window. It was just a flicker, a dark shape quickly slipping past the glass inside Lily's home. His stomach clenched, and Lily let out a small gasp, confirming she saw it too. Fear pounded in Frank's chest like a drumbeat. He made sure the bus doors were sealed shut. It wasn't long before a figure emerged onto the porch, a tall man in dark clothing. He paused, scanning the street. Then his eyes landed on the school bus. Even from that distance, Frank could feel the man's gaze. For a moment, it was as if neither of them dared to move. Then the man turned on his heel, darted back inside, and disappeared into the shadows of the house. Frank's mind raced. Would he come out again? Would he try to run? To threaten the bus? The minutes felt like hours, each one stretching with dread. Lily was crying softly, her small voice trembling as she pleaded with Frank not to abandon her mother. Frank vowed he would not leave. He would keep the bus at a distance, safe from immediate danger, but close enough to help the moment the police arrived. By the time they heard sirens, Lily was clutching Frank's sleeve. Police cars screeched to a halt in front of the house, red and blue lights illuminating the late afternoon sky. Officers leaped out, weapons drawn, advancing on the house in a swift, practiced formation. Frank jumped up, opened the bus doors for them, and pointed to the porch. "He's inside," he said in a low, urgent voice. Lily cowered behind him, tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged them to find her mother. The officers nodded, gave quick instructions for Frank to remain in the bus, and rushed forward. Frank guided Lily to sit behind him, intending to shield her from whatever was about to happen. Suddenly they heard shouts. 2 officers burst through the front door. Frank heard scuffling, a crash that could have been furniture overturning, and more shouts, but the words were too jumbled to make out. Lily sobbed quietly, covering her face with her hands. Her small frame shook, and Frank rested a gentle hand on her shoulder, hoping his presence might offer some comfort. At last, the front door flew open again. The officers emerged, restraining a tall, muscular man in handcuffs. His clothes were dirty, and he thrashed violently, his eyes full of malice. He tried to twist free, but the officers pinned him in a practiced maneuver. Another officer followed them, calling out, "We've got a woman inside. She's breathing but unresponsive. Need paramedics now." Lily jerked her head up. She tried to run from the bus, but Frank caught her arm gently, not wanting her to see the worst. "Stay here," he murmured, though he knew she was desperate to get to her mother. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived. Lily's mother, Miranda, was carried out on a stretcher, her wrists raw and bruised, her clothing torn. She was alive, but unconscious, the lines of stress and pain etched into her face. Lily broke free of Frank's gentle hold. She jumped off the bus and ran over, tears spilling down her cheeks. Miranda did not respond, but Lily clutched her mother's hand, sobbing and calling her name. Frank remained on the bus steps, his own eyes damp with sorrow and relief that the woman was alive. An officer rummaged through the intruder's pockets, pulling out various items: a small flashlight, a folding knife, and a folded piece of paper. The officer's expression darkened as he smoothed the paper and realized it was Lily's entire school schedule: times, locations, bus routes. Frank felt a surge of nausea. This was carefully planned. It wasn't a random burglary at all, it was an attempted abduction. The intruder had come prepared. If Lily had stepped into that house alone, or if she had ignored her instincts and her mother's warning, the unthinkable might have happened. Lily hovered near the ambulance, occasionally glancing back at Frank, as though needing reassurance that he was still there. Frank walked over once the paramedics allowed him to approach. He knelt by Lily's side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "You saved us," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "You saved yourself, Lily," he said softly. "You trusted your instincts." Frank could hardly bear to imagine the outcome if Lily had followed her usual routine, hopping off the bus and walking inside with no suspicion. He felt protective, paternal even, though Lily was not his child. At that moment, all he could think was, "If anything happened to her, I would never forgive myself." Police led the handcuffed intruder to a squad car. He refused to speak, only glaring with silent, rage-filled eyes. Frank studied him with morbid curiosity, trying to figure out what kind of man would target a child so meticulously. But there was no answer in that hateful stare, only the promise of violence that he had no opportunity to fulfill. The next hour blurred into a whirlwind. Lily rode with her mother in the ambulance to the hospital. Frank gave a statement to the police, detailing everything from Lily's refusal to leave the bus to his repeated phone calls to her mother. He recounted the intruder's appearance on the porch and the slash marks on Lily's backpack. The officers thanked him, noting that his quick actions likely saved Lily's life. Frank, still shaken, simply nodded. He felt no pride in this. He only felt relief. When the ambulance left with Lily and Miranda, Frank lingered, speaking further with law enforcement, verifying he had done what was needed. The lead officer, a detective named Angela Kilburn, took his contact information and promised to call if they needed more details. "You did good," she told him, her tone both grateful and grave. "She's just a kid, and you protected her." Frank thanked her quietly, then returned to his bus and drove it back to the depot. As he shut down the engine and sat in the silent cabin, the events of the day sank in with full weight. That haunting image of Lily's terrified face gnawed at him. He realized how fragile life could be, how a single moment could shift from calm routine to unimaginable danger. He stayed for a long time in the parked bus, reflecting on the entire ordeal and what it meant. Though his shift was technically over, he needed space to process. Eventually, he left the bus, clocked out, and drove home in his old sedan. But his mind refused to let go of the memory of Lily, the slash in her backpack, and the battered form of her mother. He wondered who the intruder was, and what terrible purpose lay behind that folded school schedule in his pocket. That was only the beginning, though. The next days would unravel more secrets, more danger, and more hidden truths than Frank ever expected to encounter in the small suburb he called home. He spent most of that evening on edge, pacing around his kitchen while the news droned on in the background. His house was modest: 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, and a small kitchen that often smelled of coffee or the chicken soup he liked to make when he felt stressed. He tried to keep himself occupied, but everything reminded him of Lily's horror-stricken face. He thought of calling someone, his own daughter, perhaps, but it was late, and he didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. Finally, he decided to check in on Lily and her mother at the hospital the next day, if he could. He called the hospital's general line, found out that Miranda Thompson was in stable condition, but heavily sedated. Lily was there by her mother's side, and the hospital staff wasn't giving further details over the phone. Frank resolved to visit them after finishing his morning route. A swirling sense of protectiveness and curiosity compelled him. He had to know that Lily and her mother would be all right. The next morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky. Frank did his usual route, fighting the uneasy tension in his chest as he stopped at the same school from which Lily would typically emerge. Everything about the day felt subdued, like a film overlaying reality, muffling the bright colors and the usual lively buzz. Frank reminded himself to keep focus on the road and the children in his care. After he completed the route, he made his way to the hospital. The building was a tall, beige structure with tinted windows that looked out over the city's main boulevard. He parked in the visitor's lot and walked through automatic doors, feeling the immediate rush of sanitized, cool air. The smell of antiseptic pricked at his senses. The nurse at the reception desk checked him in with the usual formalities, then told him that Miranda Thompson was in a private room, still resting. Lily was likely in the family waiting lounge or inside the room with her. Frank was asked to wait for clearance. Eventually, a young nurse guided Frank to the hallway outside Miranda's room. He stood there for a moment, hearing the beep of medical monitors inside. Through the partially open door, he glimpsed Lily leaning over the bed, gently stroking her mother's hand. Frank hesitated, unsure if he should intrude. Then Lily turned her head, saw him, and smiled, a small, tired, but genuine smile. She waved him in with a timid motion. Frank stepped quietly into the room. Lily's face was pale, a few bruises marking her arms, but she seemed physically unharmed. Her eyes, however, held a haunted look, the aftershock of fear still lurking beneath the surface. "How is she?" Frank asked softly, nodding toward the bed. Lily bit her lip. "Better than yesterday," she said, her voice a hush. "They said she just needs rest. She was tied up for a long time." Frank felt a wave of revulsion at the mental image of Miranda being bound and left helpless while her child was targeted. He set down a small bouquet of flowers he had picked up from a gift shop in the hospital lobby. "I'm so sorry," he said, words feeling woefully inadequate. Lily turned her gaze back to her mother. And 4-drip clicked softly, feeding medication into Miranda's arm. "They said she might wake up soon. She's been drifting in and out." Lily reached up to wipe away a tear. "They told me I'm lucky." She paused, then looked up at Frank. I guess I owe that to you." He sighed gently, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I did what anyone else would have done," he said. "I'm just glad you're both safe." Lily nodded. "They said the man's in jail. The police are investigating." "But," she hesitated. Frank recognized that troubled expression. "But what?" he prodded softly. She drew in a shaky breath. "My mom's friend, Miss Parker, was here earlier. She said this might not be over. That man didn't just pick our house out of nowhere. She thinks he was sent." Frank felt his heartbeat quicken. "Sent by who?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know," she confessed. "But Miss Parker said Mom had been getting weird letters in the mail. She was worried about something bigger than just a random intruder." Frank felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had assumed this was some twisted individual fixated on Lily. But if there was a bigger picture, a chain of threats leading to that horrifying moment, then Lily and her mother might still be in danger. "Do you know Miss Parker well?" he asked. Lily nodded. "She's Mom's best friend. They work together, sometimes. Mom's a paralegal. She helps out at a small law firm downtown. Miss Parker said Mom was working on a big case. Something about corruption, or an important lawsuit. I'm not exactly sure. But," Lily's voice wavered, "she thinks maybe it's connected. Frank tried to mask his surprise. He had never known much about Miranda's work. He only saw her as a dedicated, kind mother. It seemed plausible that if Miranda uncovered damaging evidence about the wrong person, it could lead to a threat. "Do you think Miss Parker would talk to me?" Frank asked gently. Lily thought for a moment. "She gave me her number before she left," she said. "She said if anything happens, to call her. She might want to speak with you, especially if she knows how much you helped." Frank nodded, feeling a weight of responsibility settle over him. He wasn't sure what he was stepping into, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. Lily was a child he had grown fond of over the years, and after seeing what she had gone through, he couldn't ignore a lingering threat. "All right, Lily," he said quietly. "Give me her number, and I'll reach out. Maybe we can figure out what's going on." Lily fished a small slip of paper from her pocket and handed it to Frank. Then, for a moment, she looked like a child on the verge of breaking down all over again. Her voice trembled, losing any semblance of composure. "Frank, I'm scared." He knelt beside her, gently patting her arm. "I know," he said. "I promise I'll do everything I can to help. The police are on your side too. You're not alone." She nodded, tears glistening, and Frank's heart ached at how fragile she seemed. He stood up slowly, glancing at Miranda, who lay still, occasionally stirring with a faint moan. "If your mom wakes up, call me, okay? I want to be sure you both are all right." He gently slipped his card onto the side table, leaving it next to the flowers. Lily murmured her thanks, and Frank left quietly, letting her have more time with her mother. As he walked out of the hospital room, a swirl of questions bombarded his mind. Why had Miranda been threatened? What was in these mysterious letters Ms. Parker mentioned? And who was behind sending a man so brazenly into their home to wait for Lily? Later that afternoon, Frank called the number Lily had given him. Ms. Parker answered with a voice tinged with fatigue and worry. She introduced herself as Nicole Parker, a junior attorney at a small firm where Miranda worked as a paralegal. Frank explained who he was, recounting the events of the bus and the rescue. Nicole thanked him profusely, then asked if he could meet her in person. She seemed uneasy about talking over the phone. They agreed on a small cafe near the hospital, and Frank drove there with a sense of foreboding anticipation. The cafe was a cozy spot, mostly empty in the mid-afternoon lull. Nicole Parker was in her early 30s, with short brown hair and sharp eyes behind a pair of rectangular glasses. She looked like someone who had spent the last 48 hours running on coffee and adrenaline. She forced a small smile when Frank approached her table. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "And for what you did for Miranda and Lily." Frank nodded, lowering himself into the chair across from her. "I just did what I had to," he replied. "How well do you know Miranda's situation?" Nicole exhaled, clasping her hands together on the table. "Miranda was assisting me with a civil lawsuit. It's a pretty big deal, actually. Our client is suing a major property development company over illegal land grabs and intimidation tactics. The case has been borderline dangerous. We've had strange calls, vaguely threatening letters. At first, we tried to ignore them, but the intimidation escalated." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You think that man in Miranda's house was connected to the people behind this case?" Nicole glanced around the cafe as though expecting to see eavesdroppers. "That's my fear. These developers have deep pockets, and they stand to lose a lot of money if the lawsuit proceeds and we win. Miranda uncovered some key documents that prove the company executives were forging permits, bribing local officials, and threatening smaller landowners to sell out." Frank felt his heart sink. So if they wanted to send a message, or stop the lawsuit, they might have singled out Miranda? Nicole nodded gravely. "She told me not to worry, that we had enough evidence to be safe, but I think she underestimated how far these people would go. If they targeted her daughter, it means they're escalating. They must be truly desperate." Frank thought of Lily's wide, terrified eyes. "What can we do?" Nicole leaned in, lowering her voice. "We need more than the evidence we already have. We need something that makes it impossible for them to silence or threaten us. Hard proof that would put the ringleaders behind bars. That's what Miranda was working on the night before she was attacked." She said she had an angle, something that would blow the case wide open. Frank folded his hands together on the table, feeling tension swirl in his gut. Do you know what it was? Nicole shrugged helplessly. She mentioned an internal memo that directly tied the executives to intimidation tactics. A smoking gun, basically. But I don't know if she found it or how she intended to use it. The firm's servers are locked down, so she might have had a paper copy somewhere. Frank recalled the slash on Lily's backpack. The man had been searching for something. Could it be in Lily's backpack? He wondered aloud, remembering how protective Lily had been of it. Nicole looked surprised, then pensive. It's possible. Miranda often tucked important documents into safe places at home if she felt her office computer wasn't secure. She was paranoid about digital hacking or unauthorized server logins. She might have put a printout in Lily's bag to hide it, or simply to keep it close. Frank nodded, feeling the weight of the possibility. I should ask Lily more about that. But I also don't want to scare her. She's been through enough. Nicole pursed her lips. I agree. But we need to know if the document still exists, or if that intruder destroyed it when he slashed her backpack. If he didn't find it, maybe Lily still has it without even realizing. Frank glanced at his phone. I'll go back to the hospital tomorrow, he said. Check on Lily and see if she has any idea. In the meantime, maybe we should be careful. If these people realize Miranda's still alive, they might try again. Nicole's eyes flickered with fear, but she squared her shoulders. I've been telling the police everything I know. But we need to be cautious. If that man was hired muscle, there could be more. I can't imagine a single goon was the entire operation. Frank realized with a chill that if they were dealing with a powerful entity, a single arrest wouldn't solve everything. The developers might hire other people, or use different tactics, to continue their intimidation campaign. All right, he said. Keep me updated if you learn anything new. I'll do the same. They exchanged numbers, parted ways with a tense handshake, and Frank drove home, mind spinning. He felt torn between worry for Lily and anger at the injustice of it all. Miranda had been just doing her job, trying to help a client fight back against a corrupt corporation. And now her family was in the crosshairs of a ruthless scheme. Frank decided that no matter the risk, he would do what he could to protect Lily and her mother. He had no illusions of being a hero, but life had put him in their path at a critical moment, and he wasn't about to abandon them. Over the next few days, Miranda remained in the hospital, gradually regaining consciousness but too weak to speak much. Lily stayed by her side, seldom leaving for more than a few minutes at a time. Frank visited whenever he could, often bringing Lily a snack or a warm drink, and occasionally reading to her from a library book he had picked up, hoping to distract her from the endless waiting. The police kept an officer posted near Miranda's room for protection, a visible reminder that the threat wasn't over. On the third day after the attack, Miranda was awake enough to speak. She recognized Frank and managed a grateful smile. Her voice was raspy when she asked him to come closer. Lily hovered by her mother's side, relief mingling with fear in her eyes. Miranda's words came in soft, tired bursts. She told them that the intruder had demanded certain papers, threatening her with a knife, forcing her to reveal what she knew. She had refused, and the man had overpowered her, knocking her unconscious. She recalled him turning the house upside down, rummaging through drawers, searching for something she had hidden. He never found it because she had tucked it somewhere he couldn't easily guess. She cast a meaningful glance at Lily, but Lily seemed confused. Frank gently prompted Miranda. Do you mean Lily's backpack? Miranda nodded faintly. It was the only place he wouldn't think to look. I told Lily never to come home alone. That if anything happened, she should run. I hoped I could keep them both safe. Lily leaned in, her voice small. Mom, do I still have it? Miranda closed her eyes, weariness washing over her. I don't know. He slashed your bag. He might not have realized it was there, or maybe it fell out. But if you still have those papers, they could help end this. Frank and Lily exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. They would look for that document as soon as possible. Lily promised her mother she would be careful. Frank decided to offer Lily a ride to her house once it was cleared by the police, to see if the backpack was still there or to check if the documents had fallen out. The idea of stepping back into that house felt harrowing, but it was necessary. As Miranda drifted back into a doze, Frank gently steered Lily out of the room, letting her mother rest. Detective Kilbourne was standing in the hallway, arms folded. She was a tall woman with a poised bearing, her expression serious. She asked them if Miranda remembered anything else about the intruder or the incident. Frank explained what Miranda had told them about the document hidden in Lily's backpack. The detective nodded gravely. "That lines up with some of the leads we've been getting from Ms. Parker," she said. "But we'll need physical evidence to solidify the case. A single intruder in custody isn't going to topple a big corporation if that's who's behind this. We suspect he's a hired enforcer, not acting on his own." Frank's shoulders tensed. "We're going to check the house as soon as we can. See if the bag or the papers are still there. Lily needs to gather her things anyway." Kilbourne considered this. "We had forensics sweep the house, but if the document was well hidden, they may not have noticed. It's probably safe now. The suspect is locked up, but keep your eyes open. I'll arrange for a police escort if you feel uneasy." Frank glanced at Lily, who looked both determined and frightened. "We'll be careful," he promised. Lily nodded her agreement, though her face was pale. The next morning, Frank arrived at the hospital early. He found Lily in the hallway, talking with Nicole Parker, who had come to check on Miranda's recovery. Lily asked if Frank was ready to go with her to the house. Nicole offered to come too, but Lily asked her to stay with her mother, not wanting Miranda to be alone. Frank said he'd watch out for Lily, so Nicole grudgingly agreed. They drove over in Frank's old sedan, making the short trip through quiet streets still damp from an overnight rain. Lily stared out the passenger window, hugging herself. The tension in the car was palpable. When they turned onto Lily Street, Frank felt a tightening in his chest. He realized that his only memory of this place now was the day of the intrusion, the open door, the dreadful wait for the police. 2 squad cars were parked out front. An officer came up to them, recognized Lily, and let them inside after a brief conversation. Frank's nerves were on edge as they stepped into the dim foyer. The living room was still disheveled, with furniture overturned, drawers yanked out, and personal items scattered across the floor. Yellow police tape sectioned off certain areas, but for the most part, the crime scene was cleared. Lily's eyes brimmed with tears as she saw the chaos in her home. Frank placed a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Let's find your backpack," he said gently. They found the backpack in Lily's bedroom. It lay on the floor near her bed, the slash across the front even more jarring now that Frank saw it up close. Lily knelt down and carefully unzipped it, spreading the contents out on her rumpled blanket. She had some books, pencils, a half-finished drawing, and a few pieces of candy. She carefully checked each compartment, feeling for any hidden pocket. Just as they began to fear the documents were gone, Lily's fingers brushed against something at the very bottom seam of the main compartment. She pulled and a small, folded stack of papers slipped out through the torn lining. Her eyes widened. "It's here," she whispered, voice trembling with a mixture of relief and dread. Frank knelt beside her. "Let me see." He took the papers gingerly as though they might crumble. The text was dense and covered with small legal jargon, but certain words leaped out at him. Project Redwood, bribery, intimidation, threat protocols. One page looked like a memo from an executive detailing how to handle uncooperative property owners, instructing underlings to use any means necessary to acquire land. Another snippet referenced payments to local law enforcement to ignore complaints. The language was chillingly direct, leaving little doubt that the corporation's upper management was orchestrating illegal activities. Frank felt an immediate sense of dread. Anyone in possession of these documents would be in grave danger, yet they were also vital to exposing the corruption. He cast a worried glance at Lily, who looked equally shaken. "We should take these straight to Detective Kilbourne," he said. "And Nicole Parker." Lily nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Do you think this will stop them?" Frank swallowed. "I hope so," he replied. "At least it'll give the case some real weight." The officer stationed at the doorway approached them. Frank explained that they had found the hidden documents. The officer's eyes widened at a brief glance, realizing the significance. She immediately called Kilborn. Within half an hour, the detective arrived, carefully bagging the documents as evidence, her face grimly satisfied. This was the breakthrough they needed. But with the documents now in police possession, tensions skyrocketed behind the scenes. Frank couldn't shake the feeling that the corporation's higher-ups would learn that the incriminating memo had been found. They might escalate their tactics. Lily, Miranda, Nicole, and anyone associated with them could become targets. And indeed, the uneasy calm didn't last. Over the next week, Miranda struggled to recover at the hospital, but progress was slow. She was traumatized, exhausted, and fearful of leaving Lily alone for even a moment. Lily, for her part, tried to maintain a brave front, but she was plagued by nightmares, jumping at small noises. Frank visited them frequently, forging a strong bond with Lily. He discovered that she was artistic. Her sketches were detailed, often depicting dreamlike scenery that spoke to a creative soul overshadowed by fear. One evening, after finishing an especially tense conversation with Nicole about how the legal proceedings were shaping up, Frank pulled into his driveway and felt a prickle at the back of his neck. Something was off. He parked, took a deep breath, and stepped out of his car. Under the porch light, he saw a piece of paper pinned to his front door with a small knife. His heart thundered as he approached. The paper read, "Stay away from them. This isn't your fight. Next time, we won't miss." No signature, just that stark warning. He looked around, seeing no one. The street was quiet, but his skin crawled with the sense of being watched. That night, Frank locked his doors, checked the windows, and paced the living room. It was the first time he truly feared for his own safety. Yet he couldn't bring himself to abandon Lily and her mother, not after what they had already endured. He dialed Nicole's number and told her about the threat. She told him he should alert the police, which he did. Detective Kilborn took the matter seriously, warning Frank to stay vigilant. She offered to arrange patrols past his house. Frank agreed, though he worried about putting more officers in harm's way. The following days only ratcheted up the tension. Headlines about the lawsuit began to appear in local news outlets. Anonymous sources hinted at major evidence turned over to the police, fueling rumors that city officials might be involved. The corporation's spokesperson vehemently denied wrongdoing, calling the accusations baseless. Rumblings of high-profile corruption drew spectators. A swirl of attention circled Lily and Miranda, though the hospital kept them protected behind patient privacy regulations. Nicole found herself in the crosshairs of legal intimidation. She told Frank that the law firm received threatening calls and even had bricks thrown through a window one night. Meanwhile, the man arrested at Lily's house remained tight-lipped, refusing to name who hired him. Rumor had it that lawyers for the development company were working behind the scenes to get him off on bail, but the presence of the documents made it more difficult to deny his connection to the bigger scheme. Still, money and power had ways of slipping through cracks in the system, and nobody felt entirely safe. Frank began to notice an unfamiliar car tailing him on his bus route. Sometimes it showed up in the mornings, other times in the late afternoons. A dark sedan, windows tinted. The first time, he shrugged it off as coincidence, but after the third and fourth sightings, he grew uneasy. Once, after dropping off his last child, he pulled into a gas station. The sedan drove by slowly, almost prowling. Frank felt an icy wave of paranoia. He considered confronting them, but decided it was too risky. Late one evening, while Frank was sipping tea in his dimly lit living room, an alert on his phone caught his eye. A message from Lily, who had his number. It read, "Mom is awake, worried about you. Are you safe?" Frank's heart clenched at the concern that a child was showing for him. He replied gently, lying that he was absolutely safe and not to worry. The truth was he was terrified, but he knew Lily needed reassurance, not more fear. The days stretched on, the tension never really abating. Detective Kilborn kept Frank updated, explaining that the district attorney's office was building a more extensive case using the documents they found. A couple of city officials were rumored to be under investigation. The weight of that truth, so precariously balanced, meant that a single misstep or a lost piece of evidence could see it all come crashing down. One afternoon, Frank decided to buy new locks for his house. He also bought pepper spray, a small concession to the fear that nagged him every moment he left his front door. On the drive home, he realized with grim humor how drastically his life had changed. A few weeks earlier, he had been content as a bus driver, living quietly, rarely troubled by anything beyond typical everyday concerns. Now, he was tangled up in a web of corruption and danger. He called Nicole. "Any progress on protecting Lily and Miranda once she's discharged?" Nicole's voice was heavy. "We're working with the police. They're suggesting witness protection, but that's not guaranteed unless the threat level is high enough." Frank was incredulous. She was tied up and left to die, and her daughter nearly got taken. How high does the threat need to be? Nicole sounded equally frustrated. "I know. There's a process, forms, evaluations, bureaucracy. In the meantime, I'm doing what I can. Miranda will have to lay low. I told her she and Lily can stay with me for a while, but I'm not sure my place is safer. We might need an undisclosed location. It's all in flux." Frank hung up feeling angry at the system, at the snail's pace of official processes. He wanted immediate action. He decided to see if Detective Kilburn could expedite matters. But the detective only reiterated that the wheels of justice turned slowly, even if they wanted to move faster. The best they could do was maintain security and build a bulletproof case. When Miranda was finally released from the hospital, she was still weak, walking with the help of a cane due to injuries she sustained in the struggle with the intruder. Frank, Lily, and Nicole accompanied her to Nicole's apartment, a modest but safe enough place on the other side of town. It was there that the group planned their next steps. Miranda insisted that they press on with the lawsuit. "They're not going to scare me away," she murmured, though her voice quivered with residual pain and fear. Lily stayed close to her side, hugging her carefully as if afraid of causing more harm. Days blurred into a tense routine. Lily would stay indoors with her mother, finishing her schoolwork remotely. Nicole worked on the lawsuit, coordinating with the district attorney. Frank continued to drive his bus route, though each day he felt more aware of the potential watchers. He frequently checked in with them, sometimes bringing groceries, offering to help in small ways. A fragile sense of normalcy settled, but they were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it did, one evening when Nicole discovered that her office had been broken into. Important files were stolen, computers were smashed, and even the hard drives from the servers were ripped out. Nicole was in tears when she told Miranda, explaining that the firm had backups, but it would take time to restore everything. The next day, the local news reported that the indicted man was now being represented by a high-profile defense attorney rumored to have ties with the development company. The attorney was challenging the legality of the evidence found in Lily's backpack, claiming it was obtained under dubious circumstances. The undertone was obvious. Money and influence were at play to sabotage the case from every angle. Frank watched Lily through all of this, amazed at her quiet strength. She remained at her mother's side, offering emotional support, yet she was still just a child who had nightmares and a heartbreakingly cautious gaze whenever the doorbell rang. Frank tried to cheer her with small acts, new art supplies, her favorite snacks. He knew none of it could erase the trauma, but he hoped it reminded her that not everyone in the world was a monster. As the legal showdown neared, tensions rose. The corporation's representation attacked the credibility of the documents. The district attorney's office fought back, bolstered by a mounting public outcry once the media latched onto the corruption storyline. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, demanding justice and accountability. Threatening letters continued to appear at Nicole's office. One unmarked envelope contained only a photograph of Lily leaving the hospital, a chilling reminder that she was in the crosshairs. The police responded by increasing patrols around Nicole's apartment. Frank was haunted by the memory of that note pinned to his door, a stark warning that this wasn't his fight. But he had already chosen a side. Each day, he expected a confrontation, a tailing car, or another late-night scare. He doubled the checks on his bus in the morning, in case someone tried to tamper with it. He even started wearing a discreet body cam on his shift, hoping that if something happened, he would have evidence. It was a precaution the police recommended in hush-hush terms, off the record, acknowledging that corruption might extend deeper than anyone knew. Meanwhile, the man who had attacked Miranda bided his time in jail, refusing to name his employer. His lawyer argued entrapment and illegal search of the premises, claiming that Frank had no right to conduct a search of the intruder's possessions, ignoring the fact that the man was caught red-handed in Miranda's home. Legal motions flew back and forth in a dizzying swirl of jargon, but the core truth remained. The man had a child's school schedule in his pocket and a battered, unconscious mother behind a closet door. Yet, moneyed lawyers attempted to blur those facts, calling it a domestic misunderstanding or some other twisted spin, as if Lily's terror and Miranda's injuries were mere illusions. Detective Kilbourne, Nicole, Miranda, and the district attorney's team worked tirelessly to keep the case on track. They told Frank that if they could just get the man to flip on his employer, it would break the entire operation wide open. But the man was either too loyal or too frightened. Rumor had it that people in the corporation had ways of punishing those who talked. As the court date approached for preliminary hearings, Miranda steeled herself. She was determined to testify, refusing to be silenced by fear. Lily was anxious at the thought of her mother leaving their safe hideout, so Nicole arranged for a police escort. Frank offered to drive them, but the detective insisted on a secured vehicle, not wanting to risk the possibility that someone might sabotage Frank's bus or car. On the morning Miranda was to give her testimony, Lily clung to her mother, tears in her eyes, while two officers escorted them to a black SUV. Frank stood on the curb beside Nicole, watching with clenched fists. His instincts screamed that this was the moment when the corporation's hired goons would strike. He prayed the officers would keep them safe. Within an hour, a frantic call came from one of the officers. On the way to the courthouse, a van had attempted to force their SUV off the road. Shots were fired. The officer reported that Miranda was safe, but the driver was injured, and they were pinned down in an alley off the main downtown thoroughfare. Frank, alarmed, listened as Nicole relayed this information from the police scanner. The attackers had fled when sirens approached, but the driver was severely wounded. Miranda and Lily, who insisted on going despite everyone's urging she stay behind, were shaken but unharmed. Frank felt a storm of anger surge through him. This was too far. They had nearly killed not just Miranda but Lily again. He realized that these people would not stop until the evidence was destroyed or Miranda was too terrified to speak. Nicole, face pale as a ghost, grabbed her bag and keys, ready to rush to the scene. But the detective told her to stay put. Police reinforcements were already there. Paramedics took the injured officer to the hospital. Miraculously, no one else was hit. The near tragedy cemented the resolve of the legal team. If the corporation had stooped to open violence, they had to end this now. The hearing was postponed for a later date, giving the prosecution more time to tighten security and gather additional testimony. Frank visited Miranda and Lily that evening, finding them both deeply shaken. Lily's eyes were red from crying. She told Frank in a trembling voice that the men in the van had worn masks and carried guns, just like in the movies, only this time, it was her life on the line. Frank sat with them late into the night, comforting Lily while Miranda recounted the harrowing details to Nicole and a detective over the phone. They contemplated leaving the city entirely until the trial, but Miranda was adamant about standing her ground. She refused to be run out of her home. Frank admired her courage, though he feared the toll it might take on Lily. That night, after the detective left, Lily approached Frank quietly. She asked if she could see the bus again, just to feel normal. He agreed, driving her to the bus depot in the quiet hours. Lily walked the length of the aisle, trailing her fingers along the seats as though reacquainting herself with the last bastion of her routine life. She looked back at Frank and said, "I feel safe here, you know?" Frank's throat tightened. "You're always safe with me," he promised. In the following weeks, the tension continued to crest. More evidence came to light. Detective Kilbourne uncovered financial records tying the suspect in custody to an offshore account linked to the corporation's CFO. A second intruder, believed to be an associate of the first, was picked up in another state, carrying a list of addresses that included Nicole's apartment, Frank's home, and the local station where the bus route started. The plan, it seemed, had been to systematically threaten or eliminate everyone who possessed evidence of wrongdoing. Despite it all, The corporate machine publicly denied any association, spinning every story. They called the indicted men fringe elements, disgruntled employees acting without authorization, and so on. But the puzzle pieces were lining up in a way that made their denials ring hollow. Public sentiment started shifting, especially as the local media ran exposés on the intimidation tactics used against landowners and revealed the near abduction of an 11-year-old girl. As the revised court date loomed closer, the FBI stepped in, suspecting that local corruption might extend into high-level offices. Their presence brought additional manpower and investigative tools, providing a sense of relief to those who had been fighting in the trenches. Agents interviewed Frank, Lily, Miranda, Nicole, and the detective. They seized financial records from the company and began freezing accounts. The net was tightening. However, no one relaxed yet. Miranda was still the star witness, and Lily was the living reminder of how far these criminals would go. The FBI set up protective custody for Miranda and Lily in a secure location. This time, Miranda accepted, seeing how close she'd come to losing her life. Nicole also joined them, temporarily relocating her base of operations to a secret facility. Frank continued driving his bus route, but he kept in constant communication with them, determined to know they were all right. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, it felt like the entire city held its breath. Media vans gathered around the courthouse. People chanted slogans outside the steps, demanding justice. The FBI escorted Miranda and Lily inside through a side entrance, surrounded by agents. Detective Kilborn was present, along with the district attorney's team and Nicole, who clutched a sheaf of documents. The indicted men were brought in under heavy guard, stoic-faced, each with high-powered attorneys at their side. Frank sat in the audience near the front, quietly supporting Lily and her mother. He felt the weight of the months that had led them here, all the fear and strife culminating in this courtroom. The judge called the session to order. The prosecution laid out their case, presenting the documents discovered in Lily's backpack and the supporting evidence from the FBI raid on the corporation's offices. They called Miranda to the stand. She spoke bravely, her voice steady despite the occasional tremor. She recounted the intimidation she had experienced, culminating in the assault on her home. At every point, the defense tried to rattle her, insinuating half-truths, but Miranda stood firm, guided by the truth and by her fierce desire to protect Lily. After a grueling day of testimony, the judge ruled there was more than enough evidence to proceed to trial. The indicted men were denied bail, labeled a flight risk given their apparent wealth and connections. The next step would be a full criminal trial, but the stage was set. Miranda, Lily, and the entire community that rallied behind them felt a wave of cautious triumph. This was not the end, but they had cleared a major hurdle. Knowing the danger was still present, the FBI continued protective measures for the main witnesses. The defense lawyers began to scramble, sensing that public sentiment and the weight of evidence were no longer on their side. The corporation's stock plummeted. The city mayor distanced himself from them, launching an internal review of alleged bribery. Over the following weeks, a cascade of resignations rocked the developer's executive suite, each stepping down amidst swirling allegations, presumably trying to save themselves. Investigative reporters uncovered decades of shady dealings, fueling a daily barrage of damning headlines. At around this time, Lily returned to school under a watchful eye, determined not to let fear hold her back any longer. Frank resumed normal bus duties, relieved to see Lily's face among the other kids, albeit with a security officer stationed discreetly at the school gates. People recognized Frank as the driver who had saved Lily, offering him small gestures of thanks. Yet Frank tried to deflect the praise, focusing on what truly mattered, ensuring Lily and her mother were safe. The day the final trial ended was a day of catharsis. After weeks of testimonies, cross-examinations, and revealing witness statements, the jury returned guilty verdicts for key players in the corporation, including a top executive who was proven to have orchestrated the intimidation ring. The man who had attacked Miranda received additional charges, ensuring a lengthy prison sentence. In the aftermath, the city's administration underwent a massive shakeup. A handful of corrupted officials were indicted, and whistleblowers emerged with more evidence of bribery. For Miranda and Lily, it was the end of one nightmare, but the beginning of rebuilding their life. They returned to their house, which had been repaired and refurnished with help from supportive neighbors and friends. Lily's room no longer felt tainted. She had brightened it with fresh paint and new drawings. The slashed backpack, once a symbol of terror, was now replaced with a brand new one that Frank gave her, accompanied by a small heart-shaped keychain. Lily thanked him shyly, hugging him in front of the house where the final confrontation had once played out. Miranda smiled, leaning on her cane for balance, a temporary necessity until her last injuries healed. In the weeks that followed, the tension slowly drained away. The final 15% of their story together was a resolution, a chance to breathe. Frank continued driving his route, but often stopped by the Thompson home to share a cup of coffee or help with small chores. Lily confided in him about her lingering nightmares, but he saw her laughter returning, saw her create new sketches of happy scenes. Miranda started to work again, though she chose to join a new firm dedicated to helping victims of corporate corruption. Nicole remained a close friend, sharing in their relief. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden rays across the living room, Lily and Miranda invited Frank to dinner. They talked about life, the future, and how they could heal from such trauma. Lily told Frank that she planned to become a lawyer one day, to help people who were bullied by powerful entities. Frank was struck by her resolve, seeing the ember of purpose in her young eyes. He couldn't have been prouder. When dessert was finished, Lily walked Frank out to his car. She took a deep breath, looked up at him, and said, "Thank you for everything. If it wasn't for you, I don't know where I'd be now." Frank smiled gently. "I'm just grateful I was there, Lily," he replied. "And I'll always be around if you need me." They hugged, the evening breeze rustling the leaves around them, and for once, the silence felt peaceful instead of ominous. In the months that followed, the city began to heal from the scandal, forging a path to new leadership and policies aimed at preventing such corruption from taking root again. While scars remained, both literal and emotional, Miranda, Lily, and Frank embraced the promise of a safer tomorrow. The fear that once choked every hour of the day loosened its grip. Lily slept better, occasionally waking from bad dreams but quickly reassured by the knowledge that the villains who haunted her had been brought to justice. No one could undo the terror of that afternoon when Lily refused to leave the bus, whispering those chilling words about the man in the closet. Yet from that terror sprang a testament to courage, loyalty, and the power of truth. Their story became a local legend, retold among friends and neighbors. In time, it might fade into memory, but for those who lived it, it would always stand as a reminder that justice, though often delayed and burdened by obstacles, could prevail. And with that, their extraordinary journey came to its quiet close, replaced by the rhythms of everyday life: morning bus rides, homework, dinners around the table. The resolution was simple and human: a mother and daughter safe in their home, the wicked held accountable, and a humble bus driver who realized that even ordinary people could make an extraordinary difference. Thank you all for reading this far and sharing in their fight for justice. If you believe in the power of truth as much as we do, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of courage and resilience. We appreciate every one of you for being here. Stay safe and we'll see you next time.